Dear friends, I'm Michael Scharf. I'm the co-dean of the law school. Jessica Berg, the other co-dean, will be coming in a few minutes. She's coming across campus from a Board of Trustees meeting. And on behalf of the two of us in the law school, thank you for being here on this solemn occasion. We really don't come to mourn Leon, we come to celebrate him. And he is so easy to celebrate because to everybody in this room, he was a dear friend or family member. He touched our lives in so many wonderful ways. And I just looking at these wonderful pictures on the video, and a big shout out to Patty Harbold and our AV team that put that together. That was lovely. You just can't forget how much life he had when he was young and he was playing hockey all the way till he was 92, and there was a TV show about him being the oldest living current law professor in the world. So today, Jonathan Entin, who's put this together, is going to be the MC, and my job was really just to welcome you. Thank you for being here today, and John, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. We have, in addition to the folks in the room, we have a pretty good-sized online audience. So bear with me. We want to try to get them accommodated and into the program in a way as well. As Michael said, Leon Gabinet was an institution at this law school. I think that is not the simplest way to describe Leon. Leon was born in Poland in 1927. He and his family came here when he was a young boy to Chicago. He enlisted in the Navy during World War II, and he did yeoman service there. After the war, he came back to Chicago to his beloved University of Chicago, where he started in the college and then moved over to the medical school, did 2 years in the medical school, and I can say a number of Leon's former colleagues are here and can attest. Leon spent decades engaged in the unauthorized practice of medicine, diagnosing various of our ailments, usually correctly. Then he decided that he really didn't want to be a doctor after all, and so he switched over to the law school. Now, along the way, there were some detours. For example, he took some time off to help smuggle people and guns into what soon afterwards became the State of Israel. The British authorities were not happy about that, and Leon wound up being held by the British for a time. When he finished law school, he moved to Oregon, where he spent about 15 years, mostly in Portland, and came here to our faculty in 1968. At the beginning of his third year on the faculty, he suddenly became interim dean of the law school when the dean became president of the university. Leon told me, and I think probably some other folks, that being interim dean was the worst experience of his life, which is saying something considering that during World War II, his ship was attacked by kamikazes, and he spent several hours in the water. So that should tell you something about the way he regarded his time as dean. Leon was a legendary teacher, which we are going to hear about. He was the first David L. Brennan Professor of Law, something that I have a connection to because I later became the David L. Brennan Professor of Law. So that was one thing that we had in common that he didn't give me too hard a time about. Some years down the road, he got a different chair, it was endowed by his student, the late Coleman Burke, and the official name of the chair is the Coleman P. Burke Professorship of Law in honor of Leon Gabinet. Leon retired, supposedly, in 2014, just short of his 87th birthday. And to celebrate, he came back in the fall and taught a new course because he said the course hadn't been, it was insurance law, and he said it hadn't been taught since Bill Leatherbury retired a couple of years earlier. He thought we needed to have it. And Leon taught to the end. He was teaching last fall, but his health finally gave out, and so we lost him. We are honored today to have two of Leon's three children with us. The third, Katie, is ill and out of town, and that's why she is not here. The plan for this program is to have three of Leon's most successful students talk about Leon and about their careers and how Leon influenced him. And then we're going to open things up for audience reflections, and if there are folks online who have things that they want to contribute, please put your comments into, is it Mike, the Q&A?
Yes.
Put it into the Q&A, and we will have as many of those comments and questions the comments in the Q&A read as we have time for. And after we're finished, there will be a reception in the lower rotunda right behind me. But before I introduce the panelists, let me introduce Leon's son, Ari, who has who wants to help set the tone for the...
Actually, Jonathan, the reason I came is because, despite my father's best attempt to undo your undergraduate degree, President Paxson asked me to tell you that your degree has been restored at
Just for the record, when I was associate dean, I had to assign Leon to teach in this room, which he didn't, and he didn't want to be here. So he told me that if I ever thought about putting him in this room again, he would use his family connections to get my bachelor's degree with him, because Ari is married to the president of Brown University, where I got my bachelor's.
So I just wanted to say a couple of things, very, very briefly, because the structure of this panel is such a great idea, Jonathan. I really love it. And what came to my mind was Sarah, Katie, and Louise and I were spending a lot of time with my dad in his final days. And you know, as children do in these waning moments, we look for reassurance that our relationship with our parents was meaningful and important. And I thought it was like a softball for my dad. He was lying with his eyes closed, and I said, "Dad, you know, what are you really most proud of in your life?" And I was thinking, I know what this is going to be. And he said, "My alumni." And so I think, Michael, you're quite right. You know, my dad had a 60-something, 70-something year love affair with the law, and most of it was right here at this institution. He loved Case Western, he loved the law school, and he really loved his students. Thank you so much for doing this in honor of my dad.
Well, so we have, as I said, three of Leon's most successful students. And I'm just going to go across sort of in the order that people are sitting. Right next to me is Tom Callahan of the class of 1985. Tom is at Thompson Hine. He is a former chair of the tax section of the American Bar Association, former president of the American College of Tax Counsel. Next to Tom is Don Korb of the class of 73. Don is at Sullivan and Cromwell, and he is a former chief counsel of the Internal Revenue Service. At the far end is Mark Weinberger, who is now the retired global chair and CEO of what's now called EY, and is a former assistant secretary of the Treasury. So I think we have a pretty high-powered group here. And what I'm going to ask people to do is let's just start by talking a little bit start. And Tom, you mind going first?
Sure, no, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, and good afternoon, everyone. I can tell you it's certainly an honor to be here, certainly an honor to be here in this tribute to Professor Gabinet. I mean, what a terrific individual. I took the basic tax course in the fall of 1983, and at that time, tax was on the bar exam. So we had classes of over 100 people, and it was very interesting. I was fortunate. I had not come directly from undergrad. I actually had practiced with Price Waterhouse for a number of years, so I had a CPA. So when I walked into Leon's class, I had a little bit of more, heads up as to what was going to be discussed, and that made that class very enjoyable for me. And Professor Gabinet was terrific because he figured out right away that he may have had a shill in the audience, and that helped. One of the things about Professor Gabinet is he was extremely approachable by students and in the class. I mean, tax is a tough topic for students with no background in it, and what he would do is he would teach, he would lead in broad concepts, and he tried to make sure nobody was left behind. I mean, as I'm sure some of you know, in this kind of business, you can get lost in the weeds, and he always made it a point to bring it, down and relate it to concepts that people understood. It was very effective. And as you know, he had a history of not only teaching, but he was actually practicing tax law for a number of years before he came here. And he was always able to bring those experiences and really relate to the students. And it wasn't just teaching out of a book or a case book, for example. It was like, well, I had this situation. I had this reorganization. I had this situation that I had to deal with. So it was really well done. The other thing is students really enjoyed attending his class. And this was not just, somebody who was interested in tax like myself, but students wanted to go to his class. They just enjoyed listening to him. They enjoyed the repartee, the back and forth, and always looked forward to it. And of course, his stories were legendary, real world situations, and of course, hockey was part of every class typically. The only thing you didn't want to do is say good morning to it, because you never knew what was coming back. You used to say, well, what's good about it? But he said it with a smile on his face, so you always knew things were good. So it's hard for me to believe that, it's been over 35 years now since I was actually a student here. It went fast, but I always kept in touch with Professor Gabinet and with Professor Jensen. We have a very small tax bar in Cleveland, and it's been a delight to have a professional relationship, not only with those two professors, but with the law school as well. So, I feel very honored to have known Professor Gabinet, and very much appreciate being here.
Well, I wouldn't be here but for Leon Gabinet. It's that simple. Everyone who is successful in life and business has someone in their background, parent, teacher, religious figure, corporate executive, somebody who you can honestly say, that person made me, or I would not be here but for that person. That's Leon Gabinet, and I'll tell you why. I had him in my second year, I think it was 4 classes a week, basic tax, and I also had in corporate tax second semester, which was the advanced course. And I got the highest grade in that particular class. Of course, I took a pass-fail, so for the old timers here, the 2 courses I took pass-fail, that was one. The other was Ron Coffey's Securities Regulation, which was
I did the same thing.
incredible. So I had 9 hours of straight A that just went out the window. But in any event, toward the end of that second semester, Leon had the assistant district counsel, or the regional counsel in those days, from the IRS come in and speak to the class. And then the next day class, Leon told us how we really got to think about going to work for the IRS. Great experience, good place to start your career, etc. Then in the fall, and the fellow was coming back to interview for your students for a job there. So I went in to see Leon. As Tom said, he was very approachable. So I went in to see him and reminded him of the grade I got in his class. He remembered. And the interview was the next week, and I'm sure some of you have been in a situation like this. It was like a setup. I mean, there was just no question about it that I was going to get this job. It was just Leon had taken care of it. and in those days, all the top 20 or 30 kids in the class went to all the interviews. So it was very competitive. I wasn't quite at the top in those days. And a week later, I got an offer. And so then I went off to Washington, started at the Office of Chief Counsel, National Office in Washington, spent 4 years there, basic time. And maybe a little bit later, I'll talk a little bit more about my experiences there. But then I came back to Cleveland. Cleveland was my home. I was recruited to Thompson Hine LLP, came in as an associate, and spent the next 6 years. But the important thing was I got to do a lot of things during those 6 years that somebody who had just come into the firm wouldn't have had an opportunity to do because of my experience in Washington. It really opened up some doors for me that otherwise wouldn't have been open. The next thing that happens, I'm recruited by the Reagan administration to come in and be the assistant to the IRS commissioner following Professor Jonathan. There's no question in my mind that I would not have been asked to do that if I had not started earlier in the chief counsel's office. It was a stepping stone. He actually brought me in to head up. I guess, Mark, you were probably still in high school in those days. To head up the IRS's role in the what became the landmark Tax Reform Act in 1986. I was 36 years old. 300 people worked for me. It was amazing. And I got to work with one of Mark's predecessors. In fact, in those days, I thought this was like the cream of the crop of the tax law. These were the lions of the industry. People like Roman and David Glickman and Bill McKee. I mean, these are real. I got to work with all those guys. Ended up, they passed the law. The rest is history. Came back to Thompson Hine, and that's where I met Tom, and he and I spent a great deal of time building a tax controversy practice. We had some really great cases. Probably shouldn't talk about them, but we were very, very, very successful. Okay. So then you fast forward, and in 2003, I'm called by the White House to see. That would have never happened. Never happened if I hadn't been the assistant to the IRS commissioner back in the 80s. And that would have never happened if I hadn't been in the chief counsel's office right out of law school, which of course wouldn't have happened. But I then went on after being the chief counsel to become a partner in Sullivan and Cromwell in New York, and I was the first lateral partner in the firm's history since 1879. So that was kind of amazing. There were guys in other firms in Sherman Sterling where they said they were going to put a statue of me down near Wall Street. They were walking in the firm. The best way to become a partner, right, is to come off the street. So that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been chief counsel, if I hadn't been assistant commissioner. You can just see going with this. And the career I established for myself there was just spectacular. I mean, I represent companies from all over the world before the IRS. And so that is why I say, but for Leon Gabinet, I would not be sitting here today talking with you about my.
Well, it's I guess I'm the foil to Tom and Don because I didn't give up any A's I didn't deserve. Didn't get many A's here. And as I shared when I received an award here last week from the law school, this is the only law school in the country that accepted me at the time. So yeah, I got a JD MBA here. I had no CPA. I didn't work before I came here. It was my way to avoid work, was to go on to school. So I got here as a fish out of water from Scranton, Pennsylvania, small town. Sight unseen, I came to Cleveland because they took me in, didn't know what to expect, and really was pretty much over my head. I learned a lot more about myself than I learned about particular law at the time. I did okay. I got through, obviously, but what Leon meant to me was an opening about humility. And Lou Katz, who's sitting up there, was another great mentor when I was here, wrote in 2014 that Leon always recognized the humanity of our students. And so I wasn't a top student, someone who didn't deserve maybe to be sitting in the room with the professors, a little intimidated by them. And he always found time to try and pull me out of my shell and really helped me develop as much into a man as a tax lawyer or a tax person. I learned the excitement about tax law. I took every class he taught. I was in the business school at the same time, and I worked 20 hours a week. I was an intern at what was Ernst & Whinney before it became Ernst & Young. When I went and interviewed there, I was actually a gym rat playing basketball every day, and my friend was going to intern. He wanted to get a summer job, and I went and talked to Leon. He told me a lot of great things about Ernst & Whinney, although he didn't tell me it wasn't a law firm, and I didn't know till I got there. So I showed up, but lo and behold, I hit it off with the guy there and started interning, and I did that through all my 4 years of school, and then went on into the firm when I graduated. One of my mentors said to me when I, was young, he said, you'll forget what people say, you'll forget maybe what they do, but you'll never forget how they make you feel. And Leon gave me a confidence, I think, that, like you, Don, in different ways. It wasn't a position. It was a confidence that was able to walk out of the school and know that I took a tax from one of the best professors anywhere, and I felt equipped to go off and make my way in the world. And the stories he told, it's quite remarkable. My dad used to say to me, never forget who you are or where you came from. And every time I'd get a new job or I'd get a promotion, or if I became a assistant secretary, got all these things, he'd say, I'd call him, I'd be proud. He'd say, that's great, son, but no matter what your title is, I love you just the same. And when I think about Leon, that was him. He was it, and he was so proud of his kids, and he was so comfortable in his own skin. And I, you talk about never forgetting who you are, where you came from. You talked a little bit about it. A lot of us did already. Going back to protect his homeland and World War II, and then going off with the refugees and 56 years of a commitment to a marriage and a family who he cared about and never left, and a community in Cleveland. He never forgot who he was, where he came from. And so I did learn a lot about tax law, and while I was here, I didn't realize how much I did, but I learned more, I think, about becoming who I was. And when I left, I felt incredibly equipped. And so I am grateful to Leon and Sidney Picker and Professor Katz and Eric and so many people here who just took a chance on me, and I'm paying it forward best I can.
Okay. Don, you talked in more detail, I think, than others about sort of how what you got from Leon played out into your career. But I wonder if we could talk a little bit about how what you learned here, not including the sort of the personal things that Leon may have been, but sort of how that translates into the lawyers that you have become over the years, because I didn't want to take up the whole time reciting all your resumes, but you've all done remarkable things, and I wonder if we could talk a little bit more directly about sort of what you got here, and particularly with Leon, laid the groundwork for that.
Well, I've been a firm believer from the very beginning that you had to build a strong foundation. If you didn't build a strong foundation for your career, it was built on sand, and the whole thing would collapse eventually. And Leon really instilled that in us, I think. The way he approached things, it was not just from a theoretical perspective. Both Tom and Mark have said there was a lot of practicality that came with what he was teaching us. And I think just to learn how to think in terms of how to read the tax code. I remember one thing he'd always say was, because as a young person you'd be flustered, and remember you read a lot of cases. Well, this was a course based on the code law, okay, and it's different. And so the first thing you might cite was some case. Well, he wanted to know what the code said. And I remember he would say, and it stuck with me throughout my entire career, and I used it when I was chief counsel, when some young person would come in to brief me on something, is I'd say, that's all very nice, what you just told me, but what does the law itself say? Let's start with the law, the regulations, IRS guidance, and then you get to the case. I don't want to talk about the case, then so it was that methodology that I learned in the school, not just from him. I think that was, when I went through, I just had incredible professors. I'm sure there's still incredible professors today, but it was really something. And I'd always sit in the front row. I guess the first year we were assigned seats, but after that you could sit wherever you wanted, and they created a chart. And I'd always want to sit right there because I wanted to take in everything everybody said. A lot of guys wanted to sit in the back, and when they were out in the snack bar. And I'm paying good money for this, although it's, when you think back what we paid for this compared to what the case paid. And I think Leon really picked up on that. I mean, he really did. He realized these are the people. I guess he talked to some of the background guys too. But these are the people who are really interested in learning how you develop your how you think about these things. And frankly, from the day I started in Washington, I was a strict constructionist. I think because of that, because of Leon and the way he went about it. Now, as it turns out, that's not necessarily the best thing to be when you're a tax administrator, right? And I'll never forget, Ross Glager, who was the commissioner I worked for in the 80s, once said to me, I think we were trying to figure out what to do with, remember when they started the frequent flyers, you got coupons, and then we had to figure out whether they were taxed and all that kind of stuff. And he said, look, you can't be wooden-headed about how you administer the tax code, okay? And that kind of changed everything for me. I mean, there was another guy who really affected my career. And from that point forward, to be honest with you, that's how, when I was sitting in that chair, or in a chair like that, there's a different role you play. And I took that lesson to heart, that you've got to, and it just came up last week. I was interviewed by the tax, what's it called now? Bloomberg Tax, about how much the individual caught Aaron Judge's 60-second home run was going to be taxed when he caught the ball. And I don't take this the wrong way, guys, but I said, maybe in the faculty lounge, they consider that taxable income. In the real world, it ain't. If the guy sells the ball, fine. All right, that's when you can tax them. And I think Leon would have really understood that. In other words, that's how he tried to get us to think. And so that was a lesson I learned. I think it really helped me throughout my career.
I'll follow up because it's built off of that, Tom, So yeah, what Leon convinced me was don't accept anything at face value, even though you're a strict constructionist and he told you to follow the code. And he said, you know what, if you want to be a tax consultant, lawyer, whatever you want to be, what could really be helpful if you understand what they think when they write the laws, and how that way you're not just trying to apply the laws, get around the laws legally. You're actually understanding what the policy is behind it. So I went off to EY's, Ernst & Whinney at the time. 2 years in, I went to the United States Senate. I worked for two senators, Jack Danforth from Missouri, Bob Kerrey from Nebraska. Shortly after that, I went on to, President Bush asked me to be the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. I went on to lead tax policy, and we did some major tax bills. I worked for 4 presidents. Everyone since, I'm very confused, obviously. I worked for Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump in different capacities. But it was in part because I really wanted to make a difference in the way the policy works and the way rules are written. And this started all the way back when I would read the cases and I would get kind of bored and I'd apply the law. And he goes, and I said, this doesn't make sense. And Leon would challenge me to say, well, then do something about it. You know, go out and try and make a difference. And, you know, thank God my wife put up with me, because it's pretty rocky to go in and out of government. You give up a lot of income. You go, and you don't know you're going to get it back someday. You hope. But, you know, I feel some of my biggest impacts were made in and out of government. I had my own law firm for 7 years. I built it and sold it in Washington, and you knew it, Don, and it did great, but it wasn't for me. And he gave me that freedom to think differently. And I don't think I would have been terribly successful if I had a particularly linear career. And the other thing I would tell you, he was amazing at storytelling. He taught me how to tell a story, and that's how you really get people to understand who you are and what you want to do. And he had the best stories, and we can't share them here, obviously. But it was really, it was just fun to come and see him every day. He made law school fun.
Well, and I'll just quickly follow up on the storytelling. It's so important as you're a practitioner, because for the most part, and Don, you and I have had this number of times, where you have to explain these ridiculously complicated concepts that don't make a lot of sense because Congress has passed it because they had to balance the budget, to individuals, you know, who are either selling a business or having to deal with the IRS, and you have to kind of distill all of these complicated, you know, facts and law down to something somebody can understand. And, you know, why am I in the spotlight? You know, why is the IRS after me? So the storytelling is very important, and Leon was great at that. The other thing I wanted to say, I wanted to kind of also follow up on the comment that Don made about what a great education you get here at the law school. And I'm sorry we don't have all the law students sitting here, because I would tell them that. There is so much in the tax law that spins off other areas of the law. Contracts, I had Professor Leatherberry the first semester. I mean, we still deal with contracts. Real estate, real property, you know, because so much of what we do is almost kind of the caboose. You know, first they do the business deal, you buy this piece of real estate, you do that. Okay, what's the tax impact? What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? So it's extremely important. Every course we took, and from my perspective, I thought that, you know, the training and the preparation here was just fantastic.
You know, a little secret here. Maybe this will be the first time this will be revealed publicly, but graduates of this law school work together. It's interesting how that happens. Okay, I'll give. Before I came to Washington the third time, Counsel, I had met Mark when he was the assistant to the assistant secretary. Mutual friend, his deputy, Pam Olson, introduced me to Mark. And I think we kind of hit it off right away. There was just something about two guys who had gone into this law school who, you know, could be in these positions. Well, shortly thereafter, Mark left, so I never really had a chance to work with him directly in that job, but then I came in. And one thing I tried to do was reach out to all the people I had interacted with all the years. You're a product of your own, all your experiences. I had all these great experiences. Tom, as was mentioned, was chair of the ABA tax section. I had been vice chair earlier, and I was in charge of all the committees. So I met, when I took that job, I had 300 people who I could turn to, and I think I was kind of known as the chief counsel who would do this. I would turn to the people I knew, and there was an incident that happened. You hear people talk about the deep state. Well, you know, it is true to some extent, because as chief counsel, I was the only political appointee. There were 1,500 lawyers, but you're the only one. Everybody else has a career, and they have their own agendas. They've been there a long time, a lot of them, and they kind of do what they want. So one morning I opened up the daily tax report, and I see that we put out something that was just totally contrary to what I had wanted and thought the law was. All right, so how do you deal with that? Well, I got on the phone to a guy named Mike called Mark Weinberger, and I said, here this has come out here, and I'd like to deputize you And I'd like you to give me a paper that explains why these guys are wrong, so I can go in and correct it. Next call was a guy named Tom Callahan. And I said, you know, there's these AICPA rules. Can you tell me what? And between the two of them, the input I got, 6 months later, we quietly turned that around. Toward the end of my time as chief counsel, one of the big things I had to do with Mark and his team really did a great job of setting us up to deal with all of the tax sheltering problem. To some extent, the corporate tax code had become kind of voluntary. And these guys had to setting up a disclosure regime, all sorts of things really started to turn that in a different direction. And I was the one who then came in working with a guy named Mark Weinberger as commissioner to try to really finish that off. And somewhere along the line, I got this idea that what we ought to do here is the commissioner and the chief counsel of the IRS ought to meet periodically, quarterly, with the top tax people in each of the big 6 accounting firms. I thought that if you do that, then you kind of look these guys in the eye and tell them, you know, we got to cut this out. And so Everson thought it was a good idea. Who's the first guy I turned to help set that up? Mark. Told him what we wanted to do. And he really took the lead for me in kind of getting the other. It was going to be a meeting where there was only one person from each of the accounting firms was going to be there. So there'd be 8 people in the meeting. And only the principal could come. You couldn't submit that. There'd be an agenda. So the first one, Mark prepared the agenda. And the whole idea was to talk about, well, tell us what's going on. Tell us what we should be worried about. And at the end of it, the whole idea was for us to look them in the eye and, you know, say, you know, let's not do anything wrong. And I wish that had been done years before, because I thought it worked beautifully. Now, I think we did it about a year before I left. I'm not sure exactly how it was continued. But I knew it worked when maybe the 3rd or 4th meeting, and what Mark would do is he would have one of the other guys, one of the other firms kind of chair that particular meeting. And I forget which of it wasn't with the big four, it was with maybe Video Cyber and Grant Thornton. This guy sits down and he's trying to explain why this certain product that obviously they were marketing was perfectly acceptable human behavior. Well, what I noticed that each of the other guys were kind of moving their chairs away from us and started arguing with them. I knew this whole idea worked. And they never went out with that product, I guarantee you. Remember that? It was so, but I'm just telling you straight, because here you had 2 guys who went to this school who really played a major role and tried something. It's like FDR with the New Deal. You try something, keep trying things and see what works. And there was something for a period of time, at least, I thought.
Okay, we have a number of Leon's former colleagues and students in the audience and folks online. And I want to open things up, but let me just ask if anybody wants to add anything else before we open the floor.
I'd just like to thank his family for sharing with us, your dad. It's hard, and you can see the difference it made in our lives. So I know he made a huge difference in yours, and I know you made a huge difference in his.
Some sharing is divisional, Mark, but this was multiplicative. It was like our lives were all better because he loved his career and he loved working.
Okay, because we're online, I'm going to pass the mic around so the folks who are not in the room can hear. And the first person I want to come to is Leon's daughter, Sarah, who is also a graduate of the law school, but most important, she's Leon's daughter.
Well, I do want to thank everyone for coming here to remember our father. He was an amazing father as well as professor. I graduated from this law school in 1982. I think I beat some of you in age. And when I graduated, I did a judicial clerkship, and then I had to look for a job. And it came down to Corman, Jackson, and Krantz to be a litigator here in Cleveland, or Jones Day to be a tax lawyer. I am not a tax lawyer. And I'll tell you why. Because the partner who interviewed me said, well, the the Jones Day lawyers who practice tax law bill 100 hours less a year because they take the tax code home and read it at night. Well, I remember the tax code, and it had paper-thin pages. And I thought, I am not taking the tax code home. I'll be a litigator. And so the rest of my career has been with Corman Jackson. But I did my father proud because I married my husband, who has for years and years prosecuted tax fraud cases for the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I earned my way into my father's honor. And I just want to again say thank you, because that's how I remember him, as a great father and a great teacher. He gave me a lot of coaching in corporate tax when I had to take it here, and I couldn't take it from him.
Okay. Hey, well, let me start with Lou. And then
Yeah, Sharona was special to Leon, so I'm glad she's going to speak. Last week, when I got an email from a graduate of ours and a classmate of Coley's, and a lawyer for Coley in some matters, that this tribute was being held, I had some mixed feelings, because I've had a hard time since Leon died. And this makes it official, and that Leon is of blessed memory. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about 53 years of my friendship with Leon. I'm going to take a few minutes, John. When he arrived in summer of 1968 with that gang, by the way, you were always in his heart. His presence in the law school was transformational. It meant that someone with his credentials recognized what we at the time were trying to do. And we were struggling in law school. As soon as I heard his life experiences from 1934 until 1948, he was instantly my role model. And we became very close friends. And 50 years of students say, if it wasn't for Professor Gabinet, he made tax, which is a bog to us lay people, accessible to students. And he did it with kindness and humor. And if a student didn't understand a concept in a class, he'd redo the class in his office. Because first of all, he loved the law, and he loved his students, and they loved him, as Coley demonstrated. This friend in New Jersey who knew Coley very well told me that Coley never made a big move without talking to Leon, and that Leon never billed him. So his advice was worth at least $12 million. He was everyone's friend here. As soon as the faculty got to know him, he was a role model to many people. We failed him when he was interim dean. The established faculty knew everything. And one of those people, if you disagreed with him, would be prone to say, are you being intellectually dishonest or stupid? And we young Turks thought we knew everything too. And we let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And it was a tough semester. And Adelbert left him a personal problem to live with and clear up here in the law school. So it wasn't easy being interim dean, and I know that was his reaction at the end of that semester. But we lost out because if he had taken the job, he would have been a natural and kept it for 30 years and taught at the same time each semester. And we would have avoided a lot of problems if he had kept the job for 30 years. In this building, well, in the original building, and then this building after October of 1971, everyone liked Leon, and he liked almost everyone. And you know what was amazing? I'll just tell you a couple of amazing things. He was capable of talking intelligently on any subject that was taught in this school. And so people who were teaching outside of the tax area and writing would go to him and he would talk through us. He talked you guys through. And he was encouraging to everyone, except he was the only person in the world beside my wife who could tell me I was crazy and I didn't have a chance when I ran for Congress, and they were right. And I'm sure they weren't the only people who thought that, but they were the only ones who told me that. I know, John, you want me to stop. You know, in the day when women appeared in the law school, Leon was old school in that regard. We had to kind of drag him along. But he knew and encouraged women students and then women faculty, just as he did everyone else. And it amazed me in a time when it became very questionable to be touchy-feely. He knew which colleagues he could put an arm around, or which woman colleague would welcome a hug from him. In fact, a few years ago, I said to Sharona, I feel left out. And ever since, she has been kind enough to give me a hug when we see each other. Obviously, we walked from 1971 until one or the other of us had physical issues in about 2018. So we got to know each other very well. We knew each other's families well. I knew how much he loved your mom and how much he loved the three of you and your spouses and your children and your grandchildren. And he knew that about my family as well. In the middle of the summer, the last 15 years, he would tell me, this is the anniversary of Lael's death. Hopefully, they've been reunited. He was special. As you said, he was the best storyteller in the world. And I told Jerry Weiss a couple of days ago that he kind of has to take Leon's place in that role because Jerry can tell a story well as well. He was the doctor in the house, as John mentioned. I went to him for his advice and a second opinion on every doctor in the clinic. Even though one graduation day, 30-some years ago, he misdiagnosed my appendicitis as gas in the transverse colon. And it was graduation.
We didn't bill you for the time, right?
And, he was the perfect student, I'm sure, at Chicago. First of all, he was what we used to think students should be. He went into the class to learn how to think and then to apply that. Although he agreed with this school's efforts to help our students pass the bar. But when we started, we never thought that was our role. He was just absolutely special. And he was Leon. And everyone here knew that. And almost everyone liked him. And I think everyone misses him. Thanks, John.
That was wonderful, Lou. I'm Sharona Hoffman. I had the privilege of being Leon's colleague for over 20 years. I don't know anything about tax or anything else that Leon taught, though he tried to help me with that. But I do know that Leon made everyone feel special and everyone feel special to him. He used to introduce me to people as his adopted daughter. And it is true that when he would see me in the hallway or stop by my office, he would ask for a hug and a kiss, and it was a great pleasure to give that to him. It was often the highlight of my day. I did point out to him that it was extremely convenient to adopt me after I finished my schooling, paid off my loans, and had a good job. Where was he earlier in my life? But Leon was a father figure in so many ways, especially as a model of how to live a good life. And I don't really know anyone who has lived better. He was a devoted family man who told me again and again how proud he was of his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He was a scholar who unbelievably continued to write law review articles and to update his tax book into his 90s. I don't think he inspired me to want to do the same, but it was incredible that he was doing that. And he loved teaching so much that he taught until the very, very end when he just physically couldn't get into the classroom anymore. Leon recruited me to his synagogue when I moved to Cleveland in 1999, And even in synagogue, he was universally beloved and admired by everyone, which is no small feat in a religious community. He led services until the end, and he was always generous with his time, his money, which was important in our modest little congregation, and his wise counsel. And as we've heard, he was even a war hero. I couldn't believe the stories that he told me about World War II, and also in helping Israel when it was so vulnerable and struggling in the 1940s. I kept discovering new facets of Leon's life and of his accomplishments all the time. The law school just isn't the same without him, and we will all always miss him.
Hi, I'm Dan Jaffe, and I've been on the faculty since 2006, so a relative youngster in terms of how long I've known Leon. So I just briefly want to recount one single conversation that I had with Leon that was the most important for me and a little bit surprising. The first time I met Leon, he was actually leading services at Beth El before the merger, and so I saw him as, you know, a Jewish scholar, actually. And then I came here and got to know him very well, and he'd stop by my office all the time, usually on his way to Sharona's office, where of course, yes. But in any case, we would talk pretty much daily when we were both here. And one day I went to his office to chat with him. I was outraged by something that some religious leader said, and I don't recall what it was, but what I said to Leon was, you know, it's almost enough to make you want to be an atheist. And Leon said to me, oh, I've been an atheist since 1952. So that really struck me, he was a role model to me in that as well, as a Jewish atheist, and I've tried to model that and be involved in my own synagogue, even though I have significant doubts, just as Leon did. So I wanted to share that.
Thanks, Dan. Before I get over to you, Max, Mike, do we have anything online?
Yes, Professor Entin, we have 3. Do you want me to stagger these, or I'll just go one at a time? Okay, so this is from Carol Tannenbaum. At my graduation in '75, just before Sam and our family moved to California, I asked him, Professor Gabinet, I'll be practicing law in California. Aside from the law, what's the most important thing I need to know? He told me, when another attorney tries to fool you or doesn't speak truthfully about a case, make sure it doesn't happen a second time. Get everything in writing. It proved very helpful, and I was always grateful to him for his expertise and practical advice. Okay, so that was from Carol. I have 2 more.
Go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead. This is from Jesse Gilbert. My favorite memory was Professor Gabinet refereeing an all-women's hockey game I organized, modeled after the pickup games he played with the male law students. But my lasting memory is his terrific teaching. Professor Gabinet, along with Professors Moore and Jensen, gave me a solid background that well prepared me for my master's in law and taxation at NYU, and now as a practicing T&E attorney in Greenwich, Connecticut. And finally, we have Robert Jenner. My name is Rob Jenner. I graduated from the School of Law in 1985 and was a friend of Tom Callahan. Good to see you, Tom. Professor Gabinet was my tax professor. I only took tax because I thought it was on the bar, which it was not in Maryland. So it goes. In 1983, I started a midnight game of co-ed ice hockey at the Cleveland Heights rink. Just jeans and sweatshirts playing with a tennis ball instead of a hockey puck. Many of us had never been on skates, but that was beside the point. I learned that Professor Gabinet played hockey in college. I asked him if he wanted to referee our games. He said, Hell no, he wanted to play. And that started 2 years of intermittent Saturday night hockey and then post-game parties at Professor Gabinet's house. It was the best part of law school. In our final exam, he put my name on the tax final exam question as a hockey player who had an insurance policy or something like that. And I missed the next 5 minutes of the exam as I was grinning too hard to concentrate. And that's all.
Okay, Max?
Thank you. I'm Max Melman. I teach here. Leon and I overlapped for, 37 years. And I had a choice between two law schools. One of them required tax and accounting, so I went to the other one. So that's not what I had in common with Leon. We both loved singing, but we never sang together. But what we had in common was Oregon. I went to college there, and in fact, we overlapped 2 years in Oregon while I was in college and he was in practice. And in particular, what we loved to talk about together was the wilderness, and in particular, Mount Hood. So, Ari and Sarah, how old was Leon the last time he climbed Mount Hood? Was he late 70s? Was he even in his 80s? Because I remember he came back from one summer and told me about climbing Mount Hood, and I was so astounded. And
Exaggeration.
no, he was what? No, he was very, very old.
He did it against my express.
But he was very, very old. And when I stand at the base of the steep stairs in my 4-story house and I contemplate climbing the stairs, I think of Leon and I climb.
Okay, thank you, Max.
Hello, excuse me. My name is Ian Haberman, and I'm also a member of the class of 1982 with Sarah and Joe Ritigliano. And I'm also a Brown alum, class of 1966. And when I was back in Providence in 2016 for my 50th reunion, I attempted to get a private moment with President Paxson, and that's relatively impossible. So I wrote her a letter and told her my Leon Gabinet story, which I have been telling for probably 40 years, and she wrote back a charming, charming note. So let me give you my Leon Gabinet story. Now, I ranked third in my class in age. Because I was old. I was about 10 years older than most of them, and I had worked here at Case West Reserve. I was assistant dean of the undergrad of Adelbert College, and then assistant dean of Western Reserve College. And I had been the pre-law advisor for undergrads, so when it was time for a change, I just took my advice, and came here to this law school. And so I had, at some point in time, crossed paths with Leon, and so he knew me. And the first day of tax, the first semester, federal income tax, he starts talking about how, the tax code was introduced such and such year, and the dollar used to be worth much more and taxes were less. He says, but now you don't remember that, but I remember it, and Mr. Haberman remembers it. I said, okay. Well, then he pulled it again the next day. And I say, okay, this is war. And unlike most law students, I actually had a life outside, and I was in a production at Chagrin Valley Little Theater in Chagrin Falls, and it was either Harvey or Born Yesterday, and I was playing an old man. Well, I came to class the next day, a few moments late, in costume. And I had whited my hair, and I had granny glasses, and I had a cane. And I walked in, and it was, if you recall, he would be right over there, and the door entering the room was over there. And I came in, and he looked over, and he stopped, and he stared. And I said, excuse me for being late, but us old folks need more time to get where we're going. And I tottered up to my seat, and of course, the class roared. He said, I think I had that coming. I said, yeah, you probably did. But I will tell you, he did have the final word, because each semester I was on one of the final exam questions. I think in corporate tax, I was the president of an old age home. But now, the PS to this whole story is I was having dinner at Jack's Deli probably 10 years ago up on Cedar near Warrensville. And I see Leon there with somebody. And I walked over and I sat down and I just looked at him. And he looked at me and he turned to this person and said, he's probably a former student of mine and he wants me to guess who he is. And so I waited and I looked at him and I said, Ian Haberman. He said, oh my God. He turned to this person and told her what I had pulled 30 years before. So I can't say tax is a major part of my life. I'm court mediator from Medina County Court of Common Pleas, but my experience here at this law school was wonderful, and Leon was a major part of it.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock and also listening to Ian's story, and I don't know that anybody can top that one. And so, in the interest of giving people an opportunity to enjoy each other and choose, let me bring the formal proceedings to a close. Let me thank Mark and Don and Tom for your great contributions. Let me thank everyone who spoke here, and also all of you who joined us. I think it is very clear how much Leon meant to all of us and to the institution, and I hope, Ari and Sarah, that this is a fitting tribute to your dad.
He would have loved this.
Well, let's conclude the formal proceedings. As I said, we have a reception in the lower rotunda just on the other side of this wall, and I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible and maybe having a chance to talk to you. Thank you all.
Guys.